World War II, which began in 1939, turned into a global conflict that proved to be unprecedented in terms of its scale and ferocity. Military operations were waged across several continents and oceans, which created numerous fronts around the world. Traditionally, the fronts of World War II are divided into several main theaters of military operations, which, in turn, were divided into numerous local zones. Among the main fronts are Western Europe, including the Polish campaign, the battles for France and the United Kingdom, and the Italian campaign, referred to as the Second Front from the time of the Allied landing in Normandy in 1944. Eastern Europe, or the Eastern Front, the Soviet-German theater of operations, where the Great Patriotic War unfolded and the largest and bloodiest land battles in human history took place. The Pacific Front, which included the war in the Pacific Ocean, Southeast Asia, and the Far East between Japan and China, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and other states. It often included a separate China, Burma, India front, which encompassed military operations in Southeast Asia and battles between Japan and China and their allies. The Mediterranean Front, which affected the territories of North Africa, Greece, and Yugoslavia under military pressure from Italy and the Axis powers. The Atlantic Front, where the fate of the shipping convoys between the Western and Eastern hemispheres was decided. Following the phony war and the Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg in Western Europe, the Eastern Front became the main theater of prolonged and brutal fighting. Casualties on this front accounted for up to 80% of Germany's total military losses and approximately 80% of the Wehrmacht's total losses throughout the war. The Nazi bloc's main ground forces were defeated on the Eastern Front. An analysis of the balance of military forces involved at El Alamein, the British and American offensive in North Africa in autumn 1942, and Stalingrad, July 1942 to February 1943, suggests that the Battle of Stalingrad marked the turning point of World War II. It was after this battle that King George IV of the United Kingdom sent an honorary sword in a scabbard to the residents of Stalingrad bearing the inscription, "To the citizens of Stalingrad, strong as steel, from King George IV," as a token of the deep admiration of the British people. The sword is being preserved at the Stalingrad Battle Museum Reserve. The fighting in the West had its own specifics and unfolded in several stages. Following Germany's attack on the USSR and the start of the Great Patriotic War in 1941, the main battles in the Western Mediterranean theater of operations took place in the Mediterranean itself, where a campaign was waged against the military expansion of fascist Italy and its allies. The decisive battles, which diverted part of the Wehrmacht's forces and resources, weakened Italy's position and ultimately brought down Mussolini's regime, took place from autumn 1942 onwards. That same year, during Molotov's visit to England and the United States in May and June, the Allies promised to open a second front in the West. During the meeting of the Big Three in Tehran in November-December 1943, Churchill and Roosevelt also confirmed their intention to open a second front, but only in May-June 1944. At the same time, the USSR pledged to launch a major Red Army offensive as soon as the second front was opened, and Joseph Stalin promised to enter the war against Japan 3 months after Germany's defeat. The massive Operation Overlord, the landing of Anglo-American troops in Normandy, France, began on June 6, 1944, and became the largest amphibious operation in history. Simultaneously, the Vyborg-Petrozavodsk offensive began on the Karelian Isthmus. It became the fourth of the Red Army's military operations and was dubbed Stalin's 10 Blows. In September 1944, Stalin received a photograph from the British Prime Minister bearing the inscription, "To Marshal and Premier Stalin," who, as the head of the Russian army and the Soviet government, defeated the German war machine and helped all the United Nations pave the way for peace, justice, and freedom. From your friend, Winston Churchill. Russian State Archive of Socio-Political History. The advance of the Allied forces in Western Europe continued with mixed success. On January 6, 1945, Churchill delivered a personal and top-secret message to Stalin regarding the intensive fighting on the Western Front, and requested support for the Allies in the form of an offensive in the East. "I should be grateful if you could inform me," wrote the British Prime Minister, "whether we can count on a major Russian offensive on the Vistula front or elsewhere during January, and any other points you wish to mention. I shall not share this highly confidential information with anyone except Field Marshal Brooke and General Eisenhower, and only on the condition that it is kept strictly confidential. I consider this matter urgent." To ease the Allies' situation, Soviet troops launched a new strategic offensive ahead of schedule, and between January and April, occupied most of Poland, Czechoslovakia, all of Hungary, and the eastern part of Austria, and also reached Berlin. The opening of the Second Front forced the Wehrmacht to fight a war on two fronts, which proved disastrous for Germany, compromising its human, military, and economic capacity. The liberation of the European countries had great political significance, but above all, moral significance. The Pacific front of the military operations was shaped by Japan's militarist aggression against China and the United States. In the case of China, this involved land-based clashes dating back to July 1937, and in some cases to September 1931, when Japan invaded Manchuria. The Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937 to 1945, bogged down the vast Japanese army, numbering over 1 million soldiers, and prevented Japan from carrying out its expansionist plans in the other regions. In Southeast Asia, the Japanese indeed committed some inhumane atrocities, just as the Nazis did on the Eastern Front. In December 1937, Japanese troops captured Nanjing, the capital of the Republic of China, and spent 6 weeks massacring civilians and soldiers. The Nanjing massacre claimed the lives of over 300,000 people. The total death toll, according to various estimates, could be as high as 500,000 Chinese. The practice of comfort women, slaves who worked in brothels for Japanese soldiers and officers, also spread throughout the territories occupied by the Japanese. It is estimated that the Japanese took anywhere from 20,000 to 410,000 women from China, Korea, and the Philippines into sexual slavery during this period. There was also a special unit within the Japanese army, Unit 731, which carried out inhumane experiments on people. This unit also planned Operation Cherry Blossoms at night, which involved the use of biological weapons in California, but was thwarted by Japan's surrender. For the United States, the war with Japan began following the Japanese attack on the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor in December 1941. During the same period, the Japanese began their advance on Thailand and the British colonies of Malaya and Burma. After these events, within the span of 5 days, the United States declared war on Japan, Germany declared war on the United States, Britain declared war on Japan, and Italy declared war on the United States. The subsequent military clashes between the United States and Japan took place at sea and in the air, amidst fierce resistance and fanatical tenacity on the part of Japanese troops. Aircraft carriers, carrier-based aircraft, and submarines played a decisive role. Submarines were also a major factor in the battle for supremacy in the Atlantic Ocean. The campaign unfolded between the German submarine fleet and the Allied convoys heading for Europe to deliver Lend-Lease aid, supply Britain, and prepare for the landings to open a second front. However, the theaters of war were not limited to clashes between regular armies. One of the most important components of World War II, particularly in the territories occupied by Germany and its allies, was the resistance movement. It was not a centralized structure and took various forms, ranging from propaganda and sabotage to armed guerrilla actions against the Nazis and collaborators, which turned the Wehrmacht's rear into yet another volatile front. Resistance movement is a generic term applied to a multitude of organizations in different countries, sometimes with differing political leanings. The most widespread armed resistance occurred in the USSR, Yugoslavia, Poland, Greece, and France. Following the occupation of France in May 1940, General Charles de Gaulle, who had emigrated to England, refused to recognize the Franco-German armistice or the authority of the French government. On September 26, 1941, the Soviet leadership recognized de Gaulle as the leader of Free France and of all the free French people, declaring its determination to provide full assistance to the French people in restoring France's independence and greatness. This largely made it possible in 1942 to form a squadron in the USSR that would become known as the Normandy Niemen. It was later incorporated into the 18th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment and took part in the Battle of Kursk and Operation Bagration in 1944. The French flew over 5,000 missions, engaged in more than 800 dogfights, and shot down over 270 aircraft. For their bravery and combat achievements, the regiment was awarded the Order of the Red Banner and the Order of Alexander Nevsky. Lieutenants Albert, André, and Delapoix, as well as First Lieutenant Lefebvre, were awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. The intelligence activities of such organizations as the Red Orchestra in Germany and Western Europe, Belgium, France, and Switzerland, or the Polish Home Army, which provided information on the B-1 and B-2 rockets, were of strategic importance. In addition to intelligence work, these resistance groups often hid Jews or other persecuted individuals from deportation and distributed underground literature, samizdat. The Polish resistance was one of the most advanced in Europe and carried out active reconnaissance and sabotage operations. The Home Army, loyal to the government in exile, and the People's Army, pro-Soviet, operated on Polish territory. It was the Home Army Command that launched an uprising in the Polish capital between August and October 1944, with the aim of taking control of the city before the arrival of Soviet troops, legalizing the underground administration of the government in exile, and preventing the establishment of the Polish Committee of National Liberation. However, as a result of the German attack, the rebels capitulated. Warsaw was destroyed, and 200,000 Poles died. During the summer offensive of 1944, the Red Army approached the Vistula, but the enemy put up strong resistance during its attempt to cross the river. Soviet troops were forced to entrench themselves on the eastern bank of the Vistula, approximately 10 to 15 kilometers from Warsaw. This prevented the timely provision of military assistance for the uprising. Nevertheless, the Red Army attempted to aid the rebels by airdropping food and weapons as part of 4,821 missions. Following the liberation of Warsaw, Moscow sent the city 60,000 tons of bread, 100 tons of sugar, and 50 tons of dried fruit as a gift, and the USSR covered 50% of the city's reconstruction costs. In the first half of 1945, Poland received a total of 45,000 tons of coal, 280,000 tons of oil, 150,000 head of cattle, 130,000 tons of food, and 20,000 tons of cotton. In Yugoslavia, the resistance took shape in two movements: the monarchist Chetniks led by Mikhailovich and the communist partisans led by Tito. In addition to the resistance, they clashed with one another, but the Yugoslav National Liberation Army, led by Tito, played a decisive role in the liberation of the occupied territories. The Yugoslav guerrilla movement is considered one of the most successful in Europe. In September 1944, Tito requested permission from the USSR State Defense Committee for the Red Army to enter Yugoslav territory. Starting in February 1945, the massive transfer of Soviet weapons and equipment captured by the Red Army to the Yugoslav resistance began, making it possible to fully arm dozens of infantry divisions, several communications regiments, and engineering units. For his role in the victory over the Nazi coalition, Tito was awarded the Order of Victory in autumn 1945. The resistance in Norway and Denmark fought against Nazification and the outflow of resources. The Norwegians played a key role in disrupting the German nuclear program by attacking and destroying the heavy water deuterium oxide plant at Vamork. The resistance movement brought together people of various nationalities, including Soviet citizens who had remained in other countries. In Poland, some 20,000 Soviet citizens fought in 90 Soviet or mixed Soviet-Polish detachments and guerrilla groups. A total of 3,000 Soviet partisans fought in Czechoslovakia and over 6,000 in Yugoslavia. In France, by early 1944, up to 40 partisan detachments and almost the same number of groups were active. With up to 4,000 Soviet citizens, 5,000 Soviet citizens took part in guerrilla detachments in Italy in the fight against fascism. The movement was also active in the Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, Bulgaria, Greece, and other countries. One of the most striking episodes of Soviet citizens' participation in the European resistance movement was the uprising at the Nazi extermination camp at Sobibor, led by the Jewish Soviet officer Alexander Pachevsky. The uprising was meticulously planned and organized. Of the 550 prisoners held at the camp, approximately 420 took part in the uprising. Thanks to the well-coordinated actions, 340 prisoners managed to escape. After escaping, many of the participants continued to fight in guerrilla units. The Sobibor uprising holds a special place in the history of the struggle against the Nazi regime, as it was the only successful mass uprising within the Nazi German extermination camp system. Following this event, the camp was liquidated by the Germans, and the uprising itself went down in history as an example of courage and resistance to an inhumane system. The famous film Escape from Sobibor was based on this uprising. Hauer played the lead role of Pachevsky and won a Golden Globe for his performance. The resistance movement was a manifestation of the people's desire for freedom, people who rejected the new order and the rules of the invaders. This drive resulted in the occupied territories being transformed into a vast theater of military operations, whose most important feature was undoubtedly its international nature.